Welcome back to the Valiant Feud podcast. For our host today, we have myself, Crossfire.
Slapshot, back at it again. Raptor.
And we also have our co-host,
Shaggy.
And then we have two guests for this episode.
Hi, I'm Blackbeard. I'm a package handler.
I'm Skyscraper, and I work in manufacturing.
All right, for this episode, we'll be talking about the 2nd Amendment. Go.
All right, so we'll start like we did last time, and I will read the 2nd Amendment verbatim. The 2nd Amendment, as it is written, is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Seems like the last part of that's always optional, huh?
Yeah. So, this is a pretty hotly debated topic today, especially with current political climate, riots, all that. We see a lot of people that are defending themselves. We see a lot of people that are just going out and being vigilantes. And I think it's really important that we discuss how the 2nd Amendment works today and how it is intended by the founding fathers.
Well, before that, I think something that is good to talk about is how many weapons there are, or what are considered weapons by the government in circulation right now. I know that, what was it? I believe it was September had the highest grossing firearms sales of
It was
all time.
over 600%.
Yeah, actually, I did take note on the stat for that. Americans bought an estimated 1.92 million guns in the month of September of 2020, making it the 6th highest month on record, according to the analysis of the FBI, which is a 67% increase from the previous September of last year.
And that was only in the month of September, correct?
Yeah.
So across the board, like that number would be so much higher than what it already is.
Yeah. And firearms are being bought by tons of different people now. With like you said, all these new gun owners getting new guns.
Yeah, and it seems like this entire year, like ever since the initial rioting started, it seems like that's pretty much been the trend for it. Is that we've been shattering record after record after record for firearms purchases. I know not just second time people were like people that are I'd call them like serial firearm purchasers, where they keep purchasing multiple firearms, or people that collect them. This year has set records for first time firearms purchases. And a lot of city-based people that I think are just buying guns because they're afraid of what could possibly happen to them. They care about protecting themselves, you know.
Especially with all the riots and all the civil unrest going on.
Yeah, of course you can't blame them, you know.
Panic buying.
Yeah, panic buying.
And then with the ammo, you know, that shows with the ammo that like it's hard to find right now. So you have so much, you know. Look at years prior, you could walk into any firearms, you know, distributor, store, you know, whatever have you, and you could get as much ammo as you wanted, whatever caliber, you know, granted if it was a common caliber. And then now, since coronavirus and, you know, with everything that's been going on politically, you know, everything that's driven from that, you can't find anything because everybody's gone into this panic buy where, you know, it's the same thing with the toilet paper. Everybody was buying toilet paper, milk, you know, all the essentials. And now the people that actually utilize, you know, the 2nd Amendment in its proper way cannot do get the equipment, ammo, and whatever else to, you know, do the proper training.
Let's touch on everyone's individual understanding of the 2nd Amendment. We'll start with you, Blackbeard.
All right, my interpretation of the 2nd Amendment would be, you know, anybody, you know, it says, you know, if you want to have whatever the military has, you should be able to own the same thing, because without having something to defend against a tyrannical government to this, you know, the same magnitude of weaponry that they have, where are we? We are at a serious disadvantage. So, and I think that granted, you pass the background check and you don't have you pass you don't have any like medications that
Would impede
deem you
unsuitable to
unsuitable to own and use a firearm properly and safely. So if you pass that criteria, then I feel like you should be well within your right to own whatever you want. Granted, you have the money and whatever, and you pass the background check. Like as far as same thing with like suppressors. I feel like it helps out with a lot of people. A lot of people with hearing issues. Because it's damaging.
So I do agree with a lot of that, but the Second Amendment is the right of the people, meaning the people of the United States, all people. I do agree that there should be some slight regulation on it, and I understand that you can't legally purchase a firearm without parental consent before the age of 18, being like a long gun, and you can't purchase a pistol to the age of 21, or you can carry a pistol before the age of 21 if it's owned by a parent. But I know that a lot of people will go hunting early. By the age of 13, I know of some.
I did, yeah.
So I know people that are even younger than that, actually.
So as long as, in my opinion, as long as you are given the fundamentals of these deadly weapons, and you know how to use them, and you can use them properly, and like Blackbeard said, can pass at least a competency test where you're not being unsafe with them, you should be allowed to own them because it is the right of the people.
My definition is pretty to the point. The Second Amendment's intent and reason is to ensure that the monopoly of violence is not one-sided, meaning the monopoly of violence in definition is one group having all of the ability to do all of the violence and be the most effective at that. So if the Second Amendment were to go away, then the monopoly of violence would strictly be with the government. The government can do whatever violence they want without nearly any backlash. The Second Amendment prevents that by allowing the people to be armed to ensure that it is not tipped in one way or the other.
It's a check and balance.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all you guys. I don't think there should be any limitations on firearms. Definitely some background checks and competency tests for people purchasing firearms, but there should not be any real restriction on what firearm or firearm accessory that you're purchasing. Anything available to the military should be available to civilians with due training.
Well, see, so I know a bit more about this because doing some pretty heavy research on this stuff here, and believe it or not, that's kind of how it is. If you go through and get the proper licensing and whatnot, if you want to go through the FFLs or if you want to start an FFL with the appropriate class, you go for the higher classes, 7, 8, 9, 11, or 7, 8, 9, 10 and up. You can go out and you can buy a howitzer if you have the money for it, but then they start putting all this extra heavy regulation on top of that. Like actually, having that type of thing, you need to have a business established. You need to go through all this paperwork stuff, and anytime you do anything, you have to go through all this crazy stuff. You have to have a crazy facility to keep all this stuff in. There's a lot of regulation on it, so it's partially that way, like you said, where you should be able to go out and buy anything already, but it's not as open as you'd think. Like
the average citizen couldn't do such.
No, see, my opinion on the Second Amendment is, following along with what you guys said, but there's two main things that I'd like to add. I disagree with it being the right of the people to keep and bear arms. I think it's a requirement. I think it's necessary that people keep and bear arms, so that way it goes back to what you said, Raptor, about keeping the checks and balances in order and keeping everything safe, keeping everything how it should be, like the natural order of things. And on top of that, I really think the Second Amendment's important because I feel that the Second Amendment inherently protects all of the other amendments in the Constitution itself. Because, we have our freedom of speech, we have our freedom of religion and whatnot, like we talked about before. But if you can't have a system, if you can't guarantee it, if you can't have a system in place that guarantees your right to protect those, whether it be just by the idea of having a firearm or by force if necessary, then how good is that right? It's as good as the government deems it.
Yeah, it's as good as whoever they want to say it is. So you may have the right to free speech now, like we talked about last podcast, but all they have to do is say, hey, we're going to pass a law and now you don't have that right anymore. Yeah. And what are you going to do about it? Because you have no way of protecting that.
Yeah, that's why I said I really feel the Second Amendment is... I know each amendment is important for its own right, and each one has a very, very particular reason for existing. Each of them basically says what they exist for. But I think the Second Amendment, to me, is one of the most important, if not the most important, because it guarantees all of the other ones existing. As far as you were saying, for people to be able to get things, I still think you should be able to order machine guns on Amazon. So that's, but that's a secondary.
Well played, sir.
Yeah.
See an M60 coming through.
We'll throw this over to you, Skyscraper, for the final bit to it.
All right. So the Second Amendment, I agree with that. It's the right to bear arms, but on the flip side, say someone goes out and they go through the requirements to get like a fully automatic weapon, and then they use that for mass casualties. Okay. So if any American is able to get like a fully automatic or a mass destructive weapon, look at what's going on right now in like Philadelphia or Portland or even in major cities. Yeah.
Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Right now, yeah.
Just think of how many people would be out there killing each other or blowing up buildings or all that fun jazz just because it's our right to own lethal weapons. We'll put it that way. But I do agree that everyone should have the right to buy whatever they want and get whatever they want. But there's always that flip side of what if it goes too far.
So whenever we talk about going too far, that's a good point, because let's tie it into the First Amendment. Is saying things that are racist illegal?
No.
Exactly.
Free
We
speech.
allow, because free speech exists, that also allows people who have evil intent, evil ideas, and evil things to say whatever they want, to, as long as it doesn't mean,
as long as it's not a call to action.
A call to action. And I think that ties directly into that. There will be bad people, and it is not the gun that is inherently bad. The gun is neutral.
It's a tool.
It is nothing more. It's nothing more than a tool, and it is a messed up person that has a messed up reason to do something that is messed up.
Even right now, when you can go to you could go to several major department stores even, and every town has how many gun shops. You can go in right now and you can buy semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic handguns, and as it sits right now, like the amount of mass casualties and homicides in general that are performed with semi-automatic firearms in general is significantly less. Like I know the statistic is like you're far more likely to be punched to death or kicked to death than being shot right now. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that would necessarily change if we change the tools people had, because I think back to going off what you said, back to what Raptor said, I think it comes down to the person ordeal. And of course, if someone is evil and they have a tool that can hurt a lot of people, there's a higher likelihood that someone's going to get hurt. But what if the people that are at the likelihood of getting hurt also have the same tool to stop them?
An armed society is a polite society.
Yeah, it's a lot of ifs. There's a ton of ifs in that. So,
and that's why we're talking about it.
Of course, that's why it's all hypothetical. So that's my rebuttal to that. It's like things. If you raise the bar, I don't necessarily think it'll change much, because like if you actually I can actually allude to something that actually happened, but quite in the opposite direction. When they over in England, when they took all the guns away, people resorted to knife violence, and it didn't really change the number that much.
Mexico as well. Mexico has one of the strictest gun laws out there, and there's more violence of gangs with guns than there are like elsewhere.
I don't know if this is totally off the top of my head. I don't know. I have nothing to back this up, but I wonder if that's has to do with the fact that knives are way easier to get than a gun. It just
It
inherently
also has to do with the gun, like the drug trade in Mexico.
Yeah.
Like Mexico
Yeah.
is basically run by
The cartel.
the cartel.
yeah.
I do know, like, in Australia, they completely abolished firearms for a period of time. There was a big massacre, and that after that they abolished all firearms. They just have recently, I mean, within the past, I don't know the exact year or whatever, but I think it's within the past like 10 to 15 years that they allowed people with permit, like you have to get a permit to purchase a firearm. They've just now started that back up. But the illegal firearms in Australia, deaths by firearms, like, homicides, murders, whatnot, was way higher in the years of the firearms being abolished than whenever people were able to, get the proper permits to purchase a firearm and protect themselves. So, like you said, yes, with, there are a lot of bad people that have a lot of ill intent, but with equal evil, you can meet with equal good. It's all a matter of who wants to be more violent. Like that. I mean, that's the harsh truth about it is, who's willing to go that far to protect what is right.
Like if there's someone that's super evil, there should be someone on the other side that is super good and is willing to put their life on the line to protect other people. Like, just the world isn't full of just evil people who want to do harm with these things. The majority of gun owners, and I want to pull up the statistic for it, but concealed carry permit owners are, like, I think
80% less likely.
80% less.
It's roughly around
less
there.
likely to commit a crime.
All right, so on the concealed carry permit topic, is that your right under the Second Amendment?
To conceal?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe so. I think that having a permit to concealed carry, there are caveats to this. There are the evil people and whatnot, but I think that having the required permit to concealed carry is an infringement on rights. I personally believe that.
I know some states, I believe they're called constitutional carry states. I know West Virginia specifically is a constitutional carry state where if pulled over or questioned by any sort of law enforcement or government agency, whatever it may be, that's one of the first questions they ask you is, do you have any weapons on you? Because they allow you to have that, where in some other states where there is not a constitutional carry or being able to conceal carry everywhere, you have to give them your concealed carry license or whatever permits and licenses you have whenever you're talking to them, whenever you give them your information. That way they can ask that question.
That's like here, you have to have the permit, but you are not legally pressured to let the officer or whatever know that you have that said firearm. Like, that is not something that you have to have. Like, you don't have to tell them that. Like, that's just a courtesy thing, which I firmly believe everybody should just do with the state of things nowadays anyways, but by law you don't have to.
Yeah, create that goes into another thing. If you're concealed carrying with whenever you're at a traffic stop, one thing that I always do is the first thing I do is I tell them that I have a weapon, just to ensure that there's no like safety issue for them or me. It's a respect thing. It's
a transparency thing.
Yeah.
Right, like kind of lets their guard down just a little bit, like they're aware,
And just watch your hands. Like, just put your hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Like, it gives them a sense of security. Like, okay, this guy let me know that he has this. And if you listen to the steps that he gives you, and like most of the time they won't even even take it off you, or if it's just a normal traffic stop, they're gonna be like, okay, thank you for letting me know.
Keep your hands away
Yeah,
from it.
yeah, just keep your hands on the steering wheel where I can see them, whatever have you. And if you have to go and reach for your credentials, let me, give me a good line of sight, which again, that's just a common courtesy, and any good-doing person is gonna do, which I believe most Second Amendment people or any gun-toting American is gonna do, because with great power comes great responsibility, and I think most people that carry a firearm understand that. That there is a lot of responsibility that comes with carrying something that could potentially end somebody's life.
You could hurt yourself if you're not careful with it. It just not being, and that's goes into the importance of getting your hands on firearms, understanding that they are tools. They're not going to get up and beat you up and hurt you, but they are dangerous if not used properly.
Yeah, I personally know more people that have accidentally hurt themselves with a firearm. Like I said, not like suicide or anything. Like accidentally hurt themselves with a firearm for one reason or another, versus people that were actually, or that have purposely shot somebody. So it's careful, or you have to be careful with that. Like you said, you have to. I think encouraging, firearms training, firearms handling, and whatnot at a young age to show children the responsibility that these items are, and to really respect them, as I was taught, I think is important.
And to show the safety, and to show how to handle them safely.
Safely. All that comes inherently, yeah.
I kind of want to step into some of the things that the founder said about the militia and about keeping and bearing arms for individuals. And I've got a couple of the Federalist Papers here, and a couple things quoted that I thought were pretty important. This goes into more of my definition of the Second Amendment, so I'll just read this. This is from Federalist number 28. Power being almost always the rival of power, the general government will at times stand ready to check the usurpation of the state governments, and these will have the same disposition towards the general government. The people, by throwing themselves into either scale, will infallibly make it preponderate. If their rights are invaded by either, they can make use of the other as the instrument of redress. How wise will it be in them, by cherishing the union, to preserve to themselves an advantage which can never be too highly prized. And this is in regard to, if the federal government were to infringe on the state and the people's rights, then it is the people and the state's rights to push back on the federal government. If the state government is to push on the people or the federal government, it is the federal government and the people's job to push back on the state government using the Second Amendment. And here it talks about how wise will it be for them, by cherishing the union, to preserve to themselves an advantage which can never be too highly prized. Is talking about, this is something like the people need to understand the real reason of the Second Amendment, to protect themselves from infringement of freedom as defined in the Constitution.
Which goes to what I was saying, where I think it's important that you have the Second Amendment to guarantee your other freedoms. It's not this talking point where, the Second Amendment is about hunting. You don't need an AR-15 to hunt. You don't need a shotgun to hunt. It's like, first of all, that's not your business. Second of all, that's not what the Second Amendment's about. It's not about hunting. It's about guaranteeing your rights in a really simple form,
I mean, and a lot of people will say that it's just your freedom to own weapons, but it's not. It's about all of your freedoms, like
and
you said.
Says bear arms. It says the right to keep and bear arms in the bearing, meaning carrying, having, using, owning.
But that the bearing arms, the second part. The first part, being necessary to the security of a free state. So it's not just owning them, but the fact that owning them guarantees a free state inherently.
And how does it guarantee the free state? What people carrying around weapons doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to be good with the weapon. They're not going to know how to use it or anything, and that's why I think training is something that's extremely important. If you have firearms, you should know how to use them. You should run yourself through scenarios in having to use them, because if you don't, then you're like, what use is it for you to have the weapon?
You can even look at this too, like the way things work. It's like, where do most mass shootings occur? Gun-free zones. Because the fact that nobody else there, the exception of maybe a security guard or two, or situationally dependent, has a firearm to prevent that person. It doesn't happen in place. You don't see mass shootings in a gun store.
But on that note, so gun-free zones, since you can't conceal carry inside them because that's technically illegal because your permit is a state-given right, basically.
Yeah.
Does that void?
So the way it's set up right now is that there are certain exceptions to the carry permit, and those are, expressly right. They say, like, gun-free zones, federal buildings, federal properties, and whatnot are areas that you cannot carry a firearm. That doesn't really have to do with a concealed carry. That has to do with any place you're allowed to just carry a firearm in general. And the concealed carry permit only allows you to carry a firearm in places where you're already allowed to own or already allowed to take a firearm. So it falls underneath that own thing, or sorry, the other thing, because the current no gun zones are above that.
Well, and that also, back to the original point of where most gun violence and mass shootings happen is in gun-free zones. The reason that is the case, like you were saying, is that there's only, on the off chance there's a security guard or what have you that might have something to defend everyone, they're putting themselves in, the person doing this heinous act is putting themselves at such an advantage over everyone because they're the only ones, quote unquote, that would have the capabilities to do that, because nobody in that area, if they are law-abiding citizens like most are, have nothing to stop them.
Which shows just how messed up those people are.
Yeah, so that even comes down to even something higher than not even just guns or not. It's just a matter of good versus evil at that point. And unfortunately, for good to exist, evil does have to exist in some capacity. Because if you were to get rid of the evil as we know it now, the least good people would just become the evil people. It's a scale that just has to exist.
A vicious cycle.
The yin yang concept. One has to exist, the other doesn't. Or one has to exist for the other to exist. More so.
That brings up, like, for if you're unarmed in a safe and it's gun-free zone, there's statistics out there that shows that there's no owning citizens that are able there to stop them, and it's all pulls up that military and police personnel are the ones to respond, therefore pushing that the Second Amendment doesn't really mean anything because of that.
I would like to note, in our state, you can't conceal carry in a gun-free zone.
Can you?
You can.
Since when? Because I know
how?
Like I know our courthouse, like our local courthouse, if you were to walk in with a gun, like there's a potential for you to get arrested, even though you have a concealed carry permit.
I can touch on that.
Okay.
The inside of a courthouse or several federal buildings, you can walk in there like a courthouse, police, sheriff's office, post office, like there's other places like it that they have places where you can go and
you can
check.
You
can check your firearm there. Now, as far as carrying it in, walking around, I don't believe that to be that's not a thing.
I've personally,
but you can check your firearm there and put it into a lockbox or a locker of some sort. And
I know even police can't carry into a courtroom. Like, they have to check it before they even go in, even if they're giving testimony, even if they're in full uniform, even if they have their duty belt on where it would be. They're not allowed to have their firearms or tasers or mace or anything like that in the courtroom.
So that might not so much be a gun-free zone. That might actually just be the fact that it's a federal building, or like a state building. Because like I know the ones that I've ran into are state-owned buildings, where like you said you have to go through the check-in process and all that, and then I guess we'll count schools too, because schools would be owned by the state technically, wouldn't they?
Yes.
So that's probably what the case is there. And then other than that, can't really think of too many other places, at least in our area, that are marked as gun-free zones.
But under Slapshot's point, where would you and how would you be able to go about conceal carrying in a gun-free zone? That just seems a bit
really counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And on that, like talking about carrying weapons in schools and like having security guards in schools, I think like having security guards in schools, I think is a good thing, especially today, because there are with social media and how it messes with people's minds, and just with today's levels of depression, anxiety, unsure of yourself, stuff like that. I think it's good that security guards are in schools.
Yeah, but with being said security guards, now these security guards, I don't believe that they should be, these average Joe, rent-a-cops,
No.
I don't believe that be something, because that's really, if it gets nitty-gritty, like, most of these, most people, if they're just like a rent-a-cop, like,
They don't got
do they have the proper training to really handle somebody with a, with a battle rifle or an AR-15, an AK, something that is, able to rack off, many rounds in a said period of time, where these guys are going to be carrying a pistol.
And even then,
Most mass shootings are like that are firearms related. Well, mass shootings are committed with pistols. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I understand that, but I mean, with these, these guards, they should definitely have the training and the wit, and whatnot, understanding that, what they may come across. Like, say somebody comes in with a rifle, they better know how to, mitigate, all the aggression coming in, and be able to, situationally break down where, how to get people out and where they need to go to,
They should be more trained.
Yeah,
Like,
they should be almost ex-military or go through some sort of
some
class.
kind of same thing with police too. Like, we're talking about military, police. A lot of people know that not all of the military are like super awesome shooters or anything like that. A lot of them, they shoot twice a year, every 6 months. They get their qualification. They never shoot on the move. They never shoot anywhere other than prone, which is laying on the ground, or kneeling, and they shoot at stagnant like paper targets or targets that pop up, and that is the extent of their training. And that's a lot of like the support guys, whereas infantry gets a little more into the weeds of like movements, formations, stuff like that, and how to like deal with certain situations. And I definitely think that like if your job entails you carrying a firearm, you definitely should be you should be very trained. You
very
should
proficient.
Very proficient. You should be able to think under pressure. You should not make crazy decisions under pressure, and those are stuff that should be tested. That allow you, so then that if your job is to carry that weapon, and which means that you are more likely to get in a situation where you need it, that you aren't going to make dumb mistakes. And I think especially today with police shootings and stuff like that, that's something we need to fund the police more so that they are able to get this quality of training.
And I think a lot of the times, at least nowadays, when people are saying defund the police, they're thinking, oh, let's like unarm the police, like let's give them less firepower, because there's a lot of police gun violence right now, or gun violence related to police.
It has a lot of visibility right now.
Right, and I don't think these people that are supporting this defund the police movement are understanding that the back end funding of the police they're always going to be armed. No one's going to stop. I mean, all the police departments are going to arm their officers. Right, of course. But because if you're going to defund the police, they're going to get less training. And if you're going to train your officers less, they're not going to be ready in these situations where they need to be ready.
And I agree with that. Like, they're always going to be armed, because if they're not armed, if they don't have a duty rifle, a duty pistol, or a duty shotgun, whatever it may be, how are they supposed to stop somebody who went out of their way to get a rifle and want to cause harm to people? How are they going to stop? They're going to run up with a baton and beat him over the head while he's gunning them down? I don't think so.
Right, and that leads me to another point that I wanted to bring up, actually, because as I was doing some research on the topic, if you are going to make firearms more illegal or extremely regulated or
more inaccessible,
right, to the U.S. people who do things illegally will always find a way to get their hands on things. I mean, it's with the drug trade. I mean, cocaine isn't legal, but people still get their hands on it, right?
Laws only stop law-abiding people.
Exactly.
It's the same thing as like a lock. Locks are for honest people.
Yep.
Right. So you're
keeping the honest people honest.
right.
Yeah.
So your average Joe Americans who want to defend themselves won't be able to
And they
because
won't be as armed as the people that wish to do people harm.
right. And that guy that obtained his rifle illegally and is shooting up a place cannot be stopped.
It doesn't matter to him. Every law doesn't matter. If he got his rifle illegally, he's not going to abide by a gun-free zone.
Right.
Or like those are the type of people that like if there's a cop car there that has the window down, they go take the gun out of it because they don't care about the legality of what they do. So the gun control will do nothing.
Yeah,
to them.
it's completely stupid to think about it in a way that's like, oh, if we just get rid of all the guns, then there will be no gun violence. Well,
That might be true.
People always find a way, and guess what? If you get rid of all the guns, which is extremely unlikely, given the first statistic we talked about being there's for every
100 people in America, what's it, 120.5 I think is the number?
Yes.
Yeah, 120.5 guns. So you're looking at 393 million guns.
And so
you need a lot of tractor trailers.
Quick math.
And you just rack that off in your head.
And
very impressive.
How are you? How do you plan on getting rid of all these guns? Because I'm telling you, people are not just going to say, "Here you go, I don't want them anymore."
Well, and even if that is the case, even if you got rid of all the guns, the violence is still going to remain the same. Violent people and evil people will do evil with whatever they possibly can get their hands on. So are we going to ban steak knives if somebody goes around starting poking other people? I don't like.
That goes back to my original point of the weapon itself isn't the bad thing. The people are bad, and they're gonna grab whatever tool they possibly can. Like you said, is it a steak knife? Is it a sledgehammer? Is it a baseball? Is it a pencil? You're John Wick. Yeah, if it's a pencil, or is it gonna be a brick or a rock or their fist or their foot? You know, it's like it doesn't matter because there's something. You know, if someone's going out with the intent to kill somebody in a malicious way, there's something seriously wrong, and they're going to do whatever they can to do that. It doesn't have to be just a gun. A gun just happens to be one of many ways to do it.
Gun control will not stop crimes.
Absolutely
It will
not.
And it doesn't. It's
been
proven.
Yeah, it's actually proven that recent gun control efforts haven't stopped gun crime at all. Like,
Well, what was the 1994? Was it the crime bill? Is that what that was called?
For what, the gun control?
Yeah.
No, the crime bill was unrelated. Are you thinking when they cracked down on imports?
Clinton, 1994.
That was assault weapons ban.
Was that 94?
Yeah.
There's 86 assault weapons ban, and I know there's another one when the one I believe
Because it was 25 years. Because it was just up.
I believe the one you're talking about is the one where they started to require thumbhole stocks for imports and whatnot. I think that was 94, because they amended part of it. But it's like that, like it won't do anything while you're looking that up. It's like the statistics are proven. Like when Australia, go back to your point, when Australia banned all their guns, I think it was New Zealand, which so that way area and regionality isn't really a factor. New Zealand didn't, and the crime spiked slightly in Australia following that, and then they both decreased at the same rate. So it did nothing at all except make it worse,
And this goes into the same thing with over in the UK. Like, they banned firearms. So what rose? Knives, blunt objects, like the
more vicious ways of hurting.
Yeah,
people
like all right, if you
really,
if you were to think about it, if you were gonna go out one way, are you gonna sit there and take a bullet to the dome? Like God, that would never happen.
But you have to have one way or the other.
Yeah, but if you had to have it one way, are you gonna sit there and take a hammer and get bludgeoned in the face, or are you gonna take a round to the dome? I'm sorry, I'm gonna take the easy way, and it's gonna be quick.
Right.
Oh,
I agree with you.
I mean, that's not a very good way of defending the Second Amendment.
Yeah, that's
very gruesome.
It's
No,
very
but I mean,
crude.
but it's reflecting
It's
the reality of the
true, right.
situation.
I mean, it is reality. And
I did find
the
at
1994 was.
It was
the assault weapon, the federal assault weapons ban.
Okay.
Enacted by Bill Clinton.
And okay, so that leads into a whole separate point of assault weapons.
Quote unquote
assault weapons.
Get the finger
So
quotations
what
going.
I don't know if you still have that pulled up. What
do.
is Does it define what an assault weapon is?
The long and the short at the beginning of it says the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, also known as the Federal Assault Weapons Ban, the Federal Assault Weapons Ban was a subsection of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994.
Oh, it was part of the crime bill. Huh.
Yes, which included a prohibition on the manufacture for civilian use of certain semi-automatic firearms that were defined as assault weapons, as a certain ammunition magazine capacity that were defined as large capacity.
Oh, that makes sense because that's when the Striker shotgun was transferred into a Class 3 weapon, even though it's a semi-automatic shotgun.
Yeah, the 10-year ban was passed in the United States Congress in September of 1994.
So does it define assault weapon at all? Because you can't just say that this here...
Well, I'll give the definition of what they say. Assault weapons are any military-style weapons or weapons that are used by the military. But we can quickly debunk this
Any scary weapons.
simply by, well, first of all, military-style weapons. The military doesn't develop weapons.
No, they don't. They buy from contractors.
They buy from contractors who are what? Civilians.
Private companies, yeah.
Private
that's right.
companies
That
make
sell to
these
the
weapons
public.
that sell. Some sell to the public, some don't. Some sell weapons specifically for the military. But
They don't sell...
they start in the civil. These weapons that are military style weapons start as civilian weapons. They have no correlation with the military. And honestly, a lot of the weapons that you see in like Call of Duty have never been affiliated with any government. They're literally just used. They're rifles.
They're popular civilian weapons that they pull over and make it a militarized, rifle. They glorify it to be like, okay, this is the next, operator, ish sort of
and
rifle.
Usually those rifles have a certain standard of. They're not more so talking about like, oh, they have to have this and that. They want reliability out of those weapons simply because the people that use them are pretty dense. Like not dense, but like they
want to make it easy.
They
for
beat
everyone.
the crap out of stuff. Military, like
coming from durability.
Coming from a veteran, we beat the crap out of the rifles that you're issued. Like you use stuff to clean them that are absolutely not what you're supposed. Like baby wipes. You're not supposed to clean your weapons with baby wipes.
You use baby wipes?
Yes.
Really? That's pretty awesome. Well, you said
That's
about,
pretty metal.
You said the environment has something to do with the way that they design military weapons, and nowadays a lot of the contracting companies you always think of, you got SIG especially, you got SIG, you got Armalite, in the various things that you got FN, etc., that make guns now specifically for the military. Because they know that's where their market is. They know that's where the money is to keep their companies going. If civilians could go out and buy a machine gun, they would be marketing to the civilians too. But if you got a civilian that's going to pay you $1,000 for an AR, or you may sell 200 of those in this X amount of time, but in the same amount of time the government's going to come forward. The government being general thing like that doesn't have to be just the U.S., but our government will come forward and buy 100,000 rifles off you at, the same price. You're going to want to move towards that. That's just business,
Yeah. And I want to tie this point into something, again, from the Federalist Papers. This one is from Federalist number 29. And if you're unfamiliar with the Federalist Papers are papers written to I believe they're dedicated to the people of the state of New York, or this one is from the author Alexander Hamilton, which we all know is one of the founding fathers. But in this one, he said, one of the quotes that I have is, "By thus circumscribing the plan, it will be possible to have an excellent body of well-trained militia," as I turn the page, "ready to take the field whenever the defense of the state shall require it. This will not only lessen the call for military establishments," and I want to caveat this, the Founding Fathers were not a very big fan of standing armies because of the risks that it came to the regular people. "But if circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people, while there is a large body of citizens, little, if at all, inferior to them in discipline and the use of arms, who stand ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. This appears to me the only substitute that can be devised for a standing army, and the best possible security against it if it should exist. It's very clear that we have a standing army today, and not saying that I think that our standing army is a threat to us, but this is the idea that the founders had when writing the Second Amendment. This is why it's important that the people be armed. And he talks about the militia, but he also talks about a larger body of citizens, regular people. And it's also been defined, I pulled it up today, and I wish I had printed it out, but it's been defined in a court case in the late 1700s, early 1800s, that the militia is considered any able-bodied male between the ages of 18 and 40.
I was going to bring that up because it's not explicitly like how we think of militias today, where they're a registered group that you have to become a part of and have to, register as militia status. Back then, it was kind of like, I don't want to say a community thing that just occurred, but it was a general term that blanketed normal people who would take up arms if something were to happen.
And a lot of people think the National Guard is the militia, and it's not. The definition of a militia is an armed force to handle domestic issues, whether that be like someone's invading us, or like National Guard does now, which is natural disasters or stuff like that. But the National Guard deploys overseas, which inherently makes them not militia.
They're also part of the military.
They're also part, technically, of the federal government. They are at the disposal of the state, like state National Guards, but they can be called upon at any time to be utilized on a federal level, which inherently makes them, if the federal government, which as defined in some of the Federalist Papers, can be something that imposes tyrannical rule on the people, then you can't rely on the militia, the National Guard, to protect you
because
they're owned by the federal government in part.
So that's why I would definitely add something to your the definition you said of a militia, where it's a group of people wanting to protect something, comprised of citizens, non-government workers, like not explicitly government workers.
And they talk about a lot in the Federalist Papers on like how the militia should come together and stuff like that. And some of it's relevant, some of it's not relevant. They talk about like the grievances that people would have with having to. It's like a mandatory duty that everyone in the United States shows up to train. But I think the way that we should look at it today is that if you are a owner of a weapon and an able body, you should own a weapon, and you should train to the standard, like they say in here. It says little if at all inferior to them in discipline and use of arms, which is and talking about a standing army, the regular citizen should be as armed and trained as the military.
All right. So with that, militia being the topic, now I want to get you guys' opinions on this. So should you have to be, registered as a militia? Do you feel like that should be something that you should have to do? Do you feel like so if I were to say I want to start a militia, should I have to go and file all the paperwork and do all the legalities behind this, or should I be able to just, okay, I want to get a group of people together that I trust and or whatever, and just call it what it is?
I believe that's an invasion of privacy, mainly because the government then has that information that if they are going to hypothetically come into our town and take our guns away, they know we have X, Y, and Z militias operating here.
Well, this is
what we need to watch for.
Well, that's the whole point of why it's done like that, and I think too that the definition of militia per se has changed back from what it used to be to what people identify them now. But like you said, gross invasion of privacy, that just paints a giant target on your back. That way, it's like, well, they're obviously trying to keep pushing gun control for a reason. Anybody can elaborate on that. So when it comes down to it, you have a huge target on your back. That's it. All the pieces fit together.
That's the same thing as a gun registry.
Of course.
Like if they required Because I mean, whenever you go to buy a firearm, you run a background check to make sure that you are able to purchase that firearm, that you are of good mind, and your background checks out. But the firearm that you buy does not go into a registry of firearms that the government can scroll through, tap here, and Joe Schmo owns a 357 Magnum pistol. Like, they can't do that, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that, because then they can target individual people that have weapons that they don't want, or they don't like, or they don't want people to have. Because the only thing that comes from the government telling the people that they don't want you, you're not responsible enough to own a firearm. Who are they to say that you were responsible enough to own a firearm?
They don't know you from a hole in the wall.
Yeah, why does the government get to tell you what you can and can't own?
And what your capabilities are.
Because the people give them power to do that.
Well, on that topic, say a convict came out from prison. He's a free man. And he goes and purchases a firearm, perfectly legal.
No.
Can't,
If he's a convict.
Depends.
You
If
can't.
felons-
It doesn't happen.
It all depends.
Felons can't, but I disagree with felons not being able to own firearms.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because they serve their time. So
They should be rehabilitated at that point.
well. So if you go
How
to
do you
jail,
define rehabilitated?
I think there's definitely levels to it. There's a dichotomy. You can't go too high or too low. But I think if you are a felon for having an ounce of weed on you, or
I think depending on the type of
like
felony,
if you're a felon because you killed people, you're probably not getting out of jail anyways. But I don't think you probably shouldn't have firearms. But
Violent crimes.
if you were arrested for having like X amount of weed that makes you a felon and you have to serve jail time for that, I think it's ridiculous that those people can't buy firearms. You know, felons can't vote.
Yeah, I know that one.
I think all of that is ridiculous.
Well, the only thing on that part, so they go to purchase a firearm, and you don't have any background checks on what was it, shotguns now? Some rifles they don't do a background check.
I'm not aware of that. I'm
I
not
thought
aware
it was
either.
everything. I thought it was every firearm.
everything.
Do they do everything now?
Yeah.
Every
okay.
firearm purchase.
There's two different. So you do a state background check whenever you buy rifles or shotguns. If you buy a pistol, you do a state and a federal.
Okay.
That's
I was
correct.
like, I went to a gun show and got a rifle just like straight up.
Well,
Well,
you get the rifle, but you have to go to that distributor and sign the paperwork, and then they take the serial number down to the said firearm, and then that goes into the system and goes through the background check, and then it is registered to you.
Okay.
See, there's also something weird too. You're saying about there's no national registry. Does something like that exist on the state level? And the only reason I bring this up is because I know personally that my dad had a car broken into back in the 80s, and there was a firearm that was stolen. Everything in the entire inside of the car was taken, like all the radio and stuff was taken out, and that was something that was taken. Fast forward 10 years, and this investigator shows up at, and is like, "Hey, are you missing?" Gives detail of the gun, serial number. He knew exactly whose gun that was because of the serial number on it. And my dad reported that it was missing, but he didn't know the serial number, didn't have any of that written down, because this is quite a bit different because it's back in the 80s, you know. Reported that it was stolen, and didn't tell them the serial number or anything because he didn't have that information on hand, and they knew how to find him because of the serial number.
I believe, can't quote me 100% on it, but I believe that there is kind of a registry, but it's not something that they can just access out of spite. Like, hey, I want to see what this person owns. I think it has to involve a investigation or something very with like malicious intent.
Well, that may be true that is there. That you have to go through and say subpoena just to make the So you get the subpoena the information out of it. The fact that information's there is scary in the first place, because with the single press of a button, that could become a registry.
Yeah, like it could escalate to something to where you could really just pick on somebody, virtually speaking.
That might just be our state in particular, but I'm that's something I know firsthand.
Well, I know based on that, in what you were saying there, Crossfire, it was the fact that they had the serial number they knew it was for him. Whenever you fill out that paperwork to get a firearm, the serial number's on there.
Yes.
So the serial number being on there and the fact that it went through the background check with your name on it, that's the reason they knew, was because the serial number is associated with the name, not necessarily the weapon itself.
So that's what I'm getting at is, well, that paperwork has exactly what the weapon is, the manufacturer, the weapon, all that's written on there.
But there's
so
no registry that is like point and click. Like I want.
The only way they can access that is with the serial number. They can type that serial number in and find out who owns it.
Like I said, this was in the 80s. There was I doubt that there was any typage going on then.
Fair point.
Well, you said 10 years later, so
Yeah,
that stuff was put into computers and.
Well, yeah. So like that over the course of it may have gotten that,
And if they live
I
in the
don't
same
quite
area.
know the details on how it came to arise or whatever that case or whatever that was, but the fact that they were able to track him down, and this wasn't a guy from the place that we reported it to, or well, not we, it would have been him that he reported it to. All that time later, there had to have been some way to track it, so they knew exactly what he had. That's the point I'm trying to get at. So the makings of the registry are there already.
Yeah, and it would just take a half decent not even half decent, a regular programmer just to
Port the information.
to make a script that
Excel.
puts
Control
puts all
F.
of everyone on the planet's guns into an Excel spreadsheet.
Well, yeah, that's like whenever you go to transfer like a pistol to another person, you literally have to take the gun there and they record all the serial number and everything, and then they have to submit it, and you have to wait like 5 days until it actually gets transferred into your name. Is that technically the registry?
I don't know.
It's very hard to. I know it's not actually like there is a thing that makes like the registry is basically the idea of easily accessible, where anyone can just look it up and see that your neighbor has this gun or
Public knowledge.
Public knowledge, basically.
Wait, so you can look up like a serial number and find
You
the person
can.
who owns it?
Not
Not now.
No,
Not
that's
now.
just the
The
idea.
idea, or like I could look up your name and every gun you own's there.
and every gun that you've ever purchased is there.
Yeah.
That'd be
Right,
really
you-
messed up.
That's an
It
invasion
probably-
of
it-
privacy.
That's an invasion of
Big
privacy.
time.
Yeah, it'd probably even include the ones that you had sold. Probably tell
Yeah.
you the date that it was sold and to who it was sold.
Yeah, that's messed up.
Yeah.
Going into that with the whole, selling, and whatnot, of rifles, to be specific. Now, there are rifles that you can be grandfathered, so you have a family, a family member of yours, father, grandfather, whatever, passes away. You can take that said rifle, and there's no paper trail
Just a
saying that.
transfer. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to transfer that. It's like I said,
given to you.
grandfathered to you. Like it's just given to you.
Also, too, like if your father gives you a gun, it's your gun.
Yeah,
There's
because,
no
but it
tr-
has to be.
There's no paperwork.
Yeah,
no
but it has to
paperwork.
be direct.
Like family member.
Yeah, it
Yes.
has to be direct family.
That there's a whole.
Does that work? Does that work with like siblings as well?
Yes.
Yes, it
Yeah,
has
like
to be
uncle to nephew, uncle to
No.
niece,
No, I think it's just
direct.
Direct family.
I think
up
it's-
and down, and brother sister.
I believe that's how it is. Yes. And in like direct generational. So like that's how you said a grandfather can give it to a grandson as long as it's
That
direct
in
the
lineage.
line.
Yeah.
Now, do I think that? Because that's a very vague thing that goes on. Like that whole passing of firearms, between family members. You guys know as much as I do that probably happens more so that with maybe not so direct family members, like it's like because not every family member may be a gun advocate or 2A advocate, whatever, then they're like, oh, your cousin likes guns, so here. So
Well,
I imagine that probably happens.
Well, how many of those people don't actually know the law? So I think a lot. I mean,
That's-
I think there's some of it people do it purposely like that, and I think just like anything else, people aren't well aware enough of the law. It's like, oh, whoa, there's a familyhood lineage. I can give it to my cousin. I can
Well,
give
the law
it to.
shouldn't be so like the purpose of the law, like in general, should not be to restrict freedom. The purpose of the law is to give as much freedom as possible
and give safety with it.
while providing security. So I think it's a little ridiculous to have these arbitrary rules that they change all the time. Like we can't say for sure if it's direct lineage or if none of them want it, or you can give it to your cousin. And that the same way that goes with arbitrary rulings on attachments for firearms. And I kind of want to get into the NFA with banning of short barrel rifles, machine guns happened in 1930s with the Gun Control Act.
34, and then there was an amendment in 68, and then there was the additional 94 stuff modified on top of that. Yeah.
But
yeah,
what makes it, and we can look at countries like Italy, for example. I know Italy doesn't have they don't have the same freedoms that we have with firearms, but they can't conceal carry firearms unless extreme circumstance. It's super hard to get one there, but they can own whatever firearm they want as long as it's semi-automatic and as long as it's it can be short, it can be long, it can it doesn't matter what attachments are on it, because that's
There's no statute of limitations.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous because if you look at gun deaths in the United States, which are largely suicide, but if you look at gun deaths, the majority of them are from handguns. It has nothing to do with short barrel rifles or pistol braces or anything like that. The attachment
or high capacity magazines.
High capacity magazine. This is not something that you can just regulate out, and it shouldn't. The goal of the law should be to give people more freedom, not prevent it. And these are extremely arbitrary in the sense that, first of all, the military uses them. So by some of the stuff that we talked about in the Federalist Papers, you should be armed, if not the same or better than
a standing military,
than the standing army. And it just creates a whole lot of nonsense in the gun industry, especially for new people getting into it that don't have any idea. They could be doing something wrong and they don't even know it. They
could buy a pistol caliber carbine and have a vertical foregrip on it, and
now you're a felony.
You're committing a felony, and you wouldn't even know.
You put a stock on a registered pistol, now it's a felony. Now the person that is going out of their way to follow the law, or trying their best to follow the law, they went to the gun store, they did the background check, they did all of this stuff, and now because they went home and they saw on Call of Duty a cool stock and they bought one and they put it on their gun because they thought it looked cool, or that's just what they wanted.
Because they're all the same size.
It fits. Now that person is immediately made a felon, and that
cannot own a firearm.
Yeah, which is that you're
making criminals out of ordinary people,
out of regular people that have no intent of doing any harm. These are victimless crimes. That
I'm putting something on my gun that looks cool, but now all of a sudden I'm a felon
because I'm into guns,
because I think it looks cool,
or because I plan to use it for self-defense and nothing more than self-defense and training and stuff like that. So I want the correct gear that will make me most efficient in my training.
It's it shouldn't matter why you want it. That's nobody's business.
Yeah,
but your own.
Yeah.
You had lightly talked on suicide during your point there, and relating to gun deaths and violence. The suicide rate with guns will not decrease if we're going to put any kind of limitation on guns. That's not going to change.
Well, I think the suicide... Well, if you look at the statistic for gun deaths in the U.S. specifically, the majority, I think it's somewhere close to 60% of actual gun deaths in the United States are suicides. And then smaller portions being...
accidental death.
Accidental death, and... the 10% of that being, I mean, these are round figures, 10% of that being actual violent crime.
I actually do have a statistic for you. The U.S. General Accountability Office, GAO for short, estimated that 100% of deaths per year in which a child under 6 years old shoots and kills him/herself or another child could be prevented by automatic child-proof safety locks.
100%.
100%.
For the record, the suicide rate is exactly 60%. So that was I just wanted to follow up that number is 100% correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So the majority of the gun deaths that they scream about how there's a gun
There's a gun.
there's a gun problem in the U.S. and they're slaughtering people and stuff.
Over half.
Yeah,
of it's
yeah,
not
there's a
gun
gun
over
problem.
half is
Suicide.
suicides.
100% of 6-year-olds.
Or less. If someone wants to hurt themselves, they're gonna find a way. Whether it I'm sure the majority of those suicides by firearm are from males, because males usually kill themselves with firearms or something a bit more violent than I did read drinking 6 bottles of NyQuil and falling asleep forever or something. That's great. But the NyQuil challenge.
To lightly touch on my
Do not do the NyQuil challenge.
Don't.
We're not
Yeah,
endorsing
no.
the NyQuil challenge.
Do not do the NyQuil challenge.
Massive disclaimer.
To lightly touch on that though, in my joke of the 100% of deaths of 6-year-olds, that also ties in with responsibility. So if you are a gun owner, we've talked about that, safety training, knowing how to properly care for a firearm, store it properly, so that
Keep it up and away where a 6-year-old can't
if you
reach
have
it.
if you have 6-year-olds around,
Children, period.
yeah, if you
Yeah,
have
right.
kids around, you should probably keep that weapon in a safe or in a location that they can't get to. If you have a 2-year-old, keep it on top, and you want to have weapons staged in your house for safety reasons, keep it on top of the fridge, or keep it in know your kids, understand what your kids can do and their limitations, and go from there. And at the same time, teach your kids.
Tell them.
Responsibility. I'm pretty sure we touched on responsibility in the First Amendment, but the people in the United States have a serious lack of responsibility nowadays, and understanding their rights, or just doing anything in general. No one wants to take responsibility for doing things.
You're touching on that same thing. I don't believe we have a gun problem. We have a people problem.
absolutely.
The people have zero. Many people. Well, I don't want to say everybody, but most people have a serious lack of self accountability, zero responsibility for their actions. So,
Don't
with
care
these
about
people,
anyone else.
And like you guys
Now-
talked about in the First Amendment, where people don't want to be wrong. People can't accept their themselves being wrong.
with people, with this new day and age, with how people are lashing out with this, I'm a victim. Sorry, yeah, we feel bad for you, but suck it up. You got to have a little bit of self accountability for your actions and sit there and take a deep look at yourself. Is this really how I want to perceive myself? Especially if you're a firearm owner, you cannot be one of these people that go walking around, crying, and screaming out and lashing out in these really childish, manners, because that takes away from you have a lack of responsibility. That means you have, you're going to make poor decisions with said firearm, or whatever weapon, any weapon, period. So maturity is a big thing with owning a firearm, and we all train. We do this, we train. You do dry fire drills. You can, heck, you go watch YouTube and how to tear down said firearm, how it works, which is, I think, a big problem with people. Don't understand how things work. Yeah. They know that whenever you put the magazine in, you charge it, or rack the bolt, whatever, and you pull the trigger and it goes bang. That is a lot of people's ignorance. They don't understand how the firearm works. And I think education is the biggest helper for everybody. Education breeds safety. So the more you educate yourself, the safer you're going to be, because the more you understand what is going on.
And that's the same with kids. To bring that point in, the more you talk to your children or the children that are around you and say, this is what this is what it's capable of, this isn't a toy, this is a tool, this is something that you use in a last ditch situation, or something that you go and hunt with, or something that you
Understand the use of.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many people I know that know absolutely nothing about firearms.
And they own them.
And they own them. They have no idea anything about them. You'll ask them, how many rounds does it hold? like it's just a pump shotgun. They're like, I don't know.
I just keep pumping till it's empty.
Yeah, you just keep putting them in until it's empty. It's
really-
like, what good does that do you? You don't know how it works. You don't know how to tear it apart. It's just absolutely meaningless to own it if you don't know anything about it.
And with that example, like a pump shotgun where you don't know how many rounds it holds, if you ever need to use it in a self-defense situation, say it holds 4 rounds, you crank off all 4 and you pump it again and you go to shoot the last person or to defend yourself and you hear click, you're done for.
Yeah, you
need to
have
know.
a
Sorry,
level,
you just died.
you have to have a level of at least proficient and
Competency.
Competency in your firearms, especially if you are carrying them or you plan on using them for self-defense or even hunting. You need to know what that firearm is capable of doing and what you're doing with it.
But I think it's what Switzerland that I don't know if they still do. Probably not anymore. But they used to require all men to go and do firearms related things. Everybody had a gun.
I thought they all joined the
I
military.
think
I thought that was
Sweden has a
Israel.
mandatory-
Israel.
Israel is
Switzerland.
No, Israel.
Switzerland
Israel
also has a mandatory service.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
then that's
no, because that means PewDiePie
Someone Google
would
it.
have to go in the service.
no,
I don't-
he's Sweden.
Sweden.
Switzerland.
Switzerland.
I think Switzerland has
I'm pretty sure
mandatory service.
because I believe it was something like that where they had to go.
I know
through
Israel
and train.
definitely. Yeah, Israel
yeah.
definitely has a mandatory service.
Yeah, Israel nowadays does.
Japan
Korea.
does too. Korea.
Korea.
There was a buddy on my university hockey team that was from Israel, and he did do military service.
I believe it's 2 years.
Yeah.
At least.
Cause
He was
I talked-
27. So.
Yeah, well, I talked to somebody that we work with, and he's from Egypt, and
Oh, yeah.
and he had at least in Egypt it was a mandatory 2 years of service.
Yeah.
Now-
Egypt, I know, has
now-
mandatory service.
With that being said, now service is really broad. I mean, I know that you're militarized, but I don't think that it was like, okay, you're said rifleman or like they just assign you something, I believe.
But even that being said, like leading back to the Second Amendment and in being proficient with your weapons, those places that have this mandatory service, you are taught the basics of these weapons in these weapon systems. So that gives them that proficiency and at least competency with these weapons, whereas here it's you can just go out and buy one and not have to learn anything about it, which can be dangerous.
All right, so there's actually 73 countries that have mandatory military service. Some are Israel, Mexico, Austria, Finland, Switzerland, Denmark, Russia, and Brazil for a few.
I did not know Russia had that.
So that's
don't know
basically a bunch
Or
of neutral countries and a bunch of countries that are always at war.
Yes.
But so we're coming up on some time here, and I definitely think we can keep talking about this. But I want to kind of close this one out, and then if we feel like we can continue talking, then we can go to a part 2 to this, because this is something that we are all very interested in.
Passionate.
Acclimated to.
So I want to end with this. This is from the Federalist Papers, number 27. One thing at all events must be evident, that a government like the one proposed would bid much fairer to avoid the necessity of using force than the species of league contended for by most of its opponents, the authority of which should only operate upon the states in their political or collective capacity. It has been shown that in such a confederacy there can be no sanction for the law but force. The frequent delinquencies in the members are the natural offspring of the large frame of the government, and that as often as these happen, they can only be redressed, if at all, by war or violence. And that is basically saying force should be a last resort, and if it's not used in a last resort, then the only redress that it'll come to is by war or violence.
Violence is met by violence,
Yeah.
and if it's not used as a last resort, then you will be met with violence.
With that, we will end that podcast here. I want to thank our guests for coming and joining in the conversation, Blackbeard and Skyscraper. Do you have any last words you'd like to add?
Train, get familiar, and just be a decent human being.
Yeah, be smart, educate yourself.
All right.
Seems like pretty good advice. Yeah.
So thanks again for watching or listening to our second podcast. If you guys have any questions you want to ask us or anything like that, you can find us on our Discord, which is in the description of this video or this podcast. And yeah. Does anyone else have anything?
I'd say the easiest way to find the Discord is through our Anchor. It's anchor.fm/WeValiantFew. In the main description, there is the actual link to the Discord. Because I know a lot of places will show the link, but if you're on like Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, you can't click that link. So that's the best place to find it.
Yeah, if you go to anchor.fm.
Anchor.fm/WeValiantFew.
Yep. So anchor.fm/WeValiantFew. You can get on our Discord. You can talk to us directly. We can have conversations. I'd love to hear some questions or come up with maybe stuff that we've never thought about. And that was the whole point of this podcast that we made, is so then we can talk about things that we may not have heard before or stuff like that.
Create the discussion.
Yeah. So thanks again. See you soon.